In this video, I'm going to show you how I built a stool for my shop so I can easily reach items that I'd stored on a shelf high above my workbench. It's a simple stool that I built out of old used 2x4's that I found for free on Craigslist. For the design of this stool, I couldn't decide exactly where I wanted to start, so I fired up SketchUp and I began there. I started with a pretty basic concept, just two boards across the top, maybe a simple A-frame for the legs. But I realized pretty quickly that I really have no idea what I'm doing in SketchUp, so I ditched that plan and I just headed out to the shop to get started. Now, my failed attempt in SketchUp wasn't a complete waste. It helped me to visualize what the finished product was going to look like, and it helped me to brainstorm the design and to get a feel for the overall look I was really after for this project. So as you can see, the wood that I'm using is old, used wood. It came out of an old construction project. It's full of nails and has some broken and nasty ends. The first thing I needed to do was to clean it up and get it ready for use. I started by grabbing my hammer and using that to bend the nails so that they were more or less straight, and then I just pounded them back out of the wood. Once the heads were exposed, they were easy to just pull straight out. Once all the nails were out, I could have used my table saw to trim down the damaged exteriors of the wood and to sand them a bit to help avoid splinters, but I decided to live dangerously and keep the boards in their weathered state. I measured to determine what sort of size stool I could build with the two studs that I had on hand. I settled on a 16-inch wide top for the stool. I wanted it to be wide enough that I would feel planted when standing on it, and not like I was trying to delicately balance on top of a wobbly beach ball while I'm reaching for tall things on the shelves. Using the guide on my saw, I cut the legs at 15-degree angles. I wanted to make sure that the legs were all exactly the same length, so after I cut the first one, I set up a stop block that I set to the exact length of the first leg. For the other legs, I could just slide the stud down until it hit the stop block, chop it, and move to the next one. Next, I started to lay out the stool on its side so I could get a feel for how the legs would look, and measure for the cross braces that would support the top. Once I cut the cross braces and lined everything up for the first side, I drilled pilot holes for the screws. I drilled these at an angle because my deck screws are 3 inches long, and two 2x4's are exactly 3 inches thick when stacked on top of one another. I'm using an impact driver for this build, which would drive the screw down into the wood about 1/8 of an inch or so, which means the point of the screw would pop out the other side of the opposite board if I put them in straight. Putting the screws in at an angle like this ensured that they did not stick out the other side. Now, you should learn from my mistake here. If you're not very careful drilling these angles, you'll wind up having the opportunity to plunk down some cash for new drill bits that are not broken. After a few frustrating seconds digging out the busted drill bit, I used a little more caution and finished the rest of the pilot holes. This wood is pretty old and seasoned and relatively dry. I was concerned about the wood splitting, so drilling pilot holes really did ensure that nothing split during the build. Once I had the legs assembled, it was time to attach the top 3 slats. I didn't bother with super careful measurement or precision for this project, since it's just a shop stool. Also, I didn't bother with cleaning up the wood on purpose. I didn't mind the weathered or damaged look of the boards, and I just wanted a really sturdy, very strong stool that would support me and a heavy load, as I was occasionally storing heavy items up high on my shelves in the shop. Attaching the top slats was as simple as driving deck screws through the board down into the support pieces below. I put 3 screws into the end of each board. Once I finished this step, I popped the stool up onto the bench to see how sturdy it was and to decide if it needed any more bracing. I decided that it did because of this problem. It didn't actually lay very flat. This was a little confusing because I had been pretty careful with the cuts on the legs to make sure that they were exactly the same length. Then I remembered that the studs were a little warped and twisted, so it's not surprising that I didn't wind up with a perfectly flat stool. I could have used my table saw to trim these down to be more square and use my chop saw to adjust their lengths, but I came up with an even easier solution. I had my daughter stand on the stool for a few moments while I tapped the legs until they were planted nice and flat. Then I drove home the screws into their lower cross pieces, which kept the legs nice and flat and even. No more weeble wobble. At this point I thought I was done, but then I tried the stool and I found that a 16-inch height was just a little bit too tall, and I decided to add an extra step on one side. It took a few tries to cut the step to just the right size, again because of the warp and twist in the legs. Originally I thought it would be great to put the step right along the top of the lower supports, but after trying it, I decided to bump it up about 1.5 inches. I used a small level as a spacer off the lower cross piece, which worked out perfectly. A scrap piece of 2x4 would have been perfect as well, but I just decided to use the level because it was close at hand. I attached the step with 2 screws on either end, and then the stool was complete. So this video was actually something of an accident. I didn't expect to build a stool today. In fact, I came out to my shop to work on a completely different project, but I found these parts sitting on my bench that belonged in a tub that was way up out of my reach. I'd left them there days before because I didn't want to bother with getting out a ladder, and I was mildly annoyed with myself that they were still out. You can see here that the stool works great. I can reach the tallest items on my shelf above the workbench, so I can finally put away those parts that were left out. You may have noticed that I didn't use any wood glue on this build. That was on purpose. I wanted to be able to take this stool apart in the future in case I ever decided to clean up the finish or alter the design. For now, it's perfect for my needs, and I actually really like the look. So there you go, a pretty simple build. It only took about an hour or so. Thanks for sticking with me through this build and for watching this far. I'd love to hear what you think about the stool, and in particular, what could I have done better? What did you like about what I did? Let me know down in the comments, and thanks for watching.